Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's professional development workshop series for artists. We are excited to have folks back for the next installment in this series and are looking forward to a really great conversation tonight about applying for public art open calls. We are going to give folks a couple of minutes to get onto the Zoom link and get in, and then we'll start in about 2 or 3 minutes. I'll be back to just welcome you guys again in a minute. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the next installment of the PAiD Public Artist in Development Professional Development Workshop Series. We are happy to be back tonight and repeating one of our foundational webinars in this series, the one about how to apply for public art open calls. Tonight, we hope that you will see a lot of information that is useful to you as you start to either for first time apply to public art open calls, or as you look at perhaps applying to different types of open calls or open calls for larger dollar values. We're going to look at what is an open call and how one does go about applying it to it. Tomorrow, we are having part 2 of this dual repeat segment, which is the preparing a portfolio for open calls. And so I welcome you to join us again tomorrow night, same time, same place, for the second half of this really formative workshop. So I am Emily Womack with Dyson and Womack. We're public art consultants and also a fabrication firm. And we have been working with LA County to support and develop this program. PAiD is a program of the LA County Arts and Culture with funding from the Mellon Foundation. I'm going to introduce a couple of the elements of the PAiD program and share some of the upcoming opportunities through this program. I also want to note that we are recording this session. The recording sessions are going to be hosted on the LA County's PAiD page through their YouTube website. Or YouTube link. Sorry, that sounded like I'm 90. YouTube website. They will be hosting these on YouTube and linking to them on the PAiD website. And when it becomes available, we will share that with everyone. We are going to look at what next workshops are coming up, and then we're going to dive into tonight's topic and really dig into how to apply to public art open calls. I will be leading that with my colleague and peer, Ali Im. And then we will go into the Q&A part of the workshops. And that's really a chance for you guys to get your direct questions answered about these topics. And to be able to kind of bounce off questions about, the topics that we're looking at tonight. The Los Angeles County recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Kizh, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. I'm going to be silent for a moment and allow folks to continue to read this land acknowledgement.
Hey, Emily?
I have changed the slide. Are we stuck?
I think we're stuck.
I'm going to stop the screen share and try again because I'm advancing the slides and it seems like you guys are not getting them advanced. So just a moment. Can we see the land acknowledgement? Okay. I'm just going to test that it moves and then I'll come back to this slide. Is this working?
Looks good.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Back to the land acknowledgement. We'll hold this up for a few moments. So tonight, before we jump in, as we have probably some new folks joining us tonight for the first time, we're going to share a little bit about what the PAiD program is. There's 4 different distinct elements of it, and I want to share a little bit more about each of those. But first of all, overall, the PAiD program is a multi-year initiative that is, again, a County of Los Angeles Arts and Culture program. It is funded by the Mellon Foundation. Its core aim is to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in the field of public art while supporting the sustainability of LA County creative economy with artists' needs in mind. This program has 4 different elements, as I mentioned. The first element is the Artist Council. That was the first one to become live. We launched the first call for artists for the Artist Council last fall, and 8 artists were selected to take part in that program. The open call, the Artist Council engage in 2 different activities. They work with us to sit through policy discussions, to engage in discourse around policies that affect artists as they work through public art initiatives. And then we are working with them to build a set of recommendations that we're going to hand back to the county in order for them to look at and see how they might be able to work in a way that better supports artists or more supportive of artists, that it really hears directly from them. Secondly, those Artist Council members are given a stipend to be able to realize a temporary public artwork of their own. The temporary artworks from the first Artist Council are on display, many of them right now. So I really encourage you, if you have a chance and you're interested in this, to have a look at the LA County's Instagram or our Instagram at Dyson Womack to see what artists' pieces are up right now. There's a few events coming up this weekend, actually. So have a look and see, and you might have a chance to come and see some of the works that the first Artist Council will be doing over the next, through the end of this month. We will actually be launching, so the PAiD program in its entirety is iterative. We're doing it twice. So there will be a second open call for the Artist Council that's going to go live in early 2025. So if you applied before and didn't get it, or if you didn't see it or want to apply this time, we really encourage you to. Maybe you'll pick up some tips tonight about applying. And it's, again, the same opportunity, engage in these policy discussions, and then realize a temporary public artwork. The second element is the apprenticeship. The apprenticeship is a second open call for artists. The first open call of the 2 times will be actually going live very soon this fall. 5 artists will be selected. These artists can not have ever produced or finished a permanent public artwork for a civic art project in the past. So this is really first time public artists that can apply to this opportunity. If selected, you will have the opportunity to create your first permanent public artwork with the County of Los Angeles under the Arts and Culture Department. And you'll receive mentorship and training, specific mentorship with you for your project, and participate in a training program to really help support you as you work in this program in public art for the first time. There's also this workshop series. The workshop series is on now through October 2nd. There are several more workshops yet to occur. And as I mentioned as well, the recordings of these workshops will be available through the LA County website in the not too distant future. So if you've missed some and you want to go back, you can also go online and see what sessions have already occurred and what sessions are yet to come, and take your time at your own pace to work through them. Together, they're really a comprehensive look from start through the process of developing public art, not just applying, but actually working in it, developing designs, working with community, um, dealing with the administrative hurdles, all of the things that really impact artists as they work in this field. We will also be doing this program again next year, so there'll be a second iteration of the workshops. I always put this up at the end, but just a note to say, if this is something that, you're looking at the website and there's topics that you think might be interesting for us to cover in the workshop series, please send us an email, let us know. We'd be more than happy to think about adding those topics to the next iteration of the workshops. And again, at the end of this session, we'll have our email up, and Allie can also put it in our chat tonight for folks if you're interested. The last element is the PAiD website right now. The PAiD information is on the LA County site. You can go there, it's its own section, but there is going to be a more specific PAiD website that the county is working on that's going to house all of these resources. That launches TBD, but I'm sure email announcements will go out once it's launched. So that is a bigger overview of the PAiD program. We're in this third part, the workshops. And the next workshops coming up are tomorrow night, preparing a public art portfolio. We will be joined by a co-presenter, Oscar Hissa from the ICALA, coming to share her experience over the years, reviewing portfolios, looking at portfolios. We're really excited to have that conversation tomorrow night. Next week, we will be meeting in a session about why public art. This is a really great conversation about the uniqueness of public art in our Southern California landscape, about what different organizations that work in this field feel about how public art exists right now in Southern California, aspirations and dreams for how it might exist into the future. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. So if you're invested in this field, if you're interested in the development and the growth of how public art affects artists and exists in our community, this is a really great opportunity to hear some dialogue about that. And then there are several others moving forward from there. The blue link here is the link to where you can see where all of them are. You can also see who the co-presenters for these sessions are, and you can register to attend through that link as well. And I think Allie will put that in our chat tonight too. So with that, thanks for giving me a second to kind of go over the program, share a little bit more about PAiD. But what we are here tonight to talk about is how to apply to public art open calls. This workshop was the first one we did when we started this series, and it's one of two that we have chosen to do again because it's so foundational, it's so fundamental, and we want to make sure that artists have an opportunity to participate, not just in watching the recording, but to participate and ask questions that you might have. So we really encourage you tonight to ask your questions. We will answer as many of them as we can, and we'll be really direct and honest. I have, in my background, been on all sides of this. I have worked as a person running open calls with our organization. I have sat on panels, and we have also responded to open calls. So I hope you'll utilize that experience and knowledge to try and ask those questions that you may have always wondered. about in this process. We will also be joined by Pat Gomez from the Department of Los Angeles Arts and Culture tonight during the Q&A session. And as I mentioned, we will also be joined by my colleague, Ali M. So this workshop is designed to help artists navigate finding and applying to public art open calls, to learn about crafting compelling applications and creating project teams while gaining insights into the application and selection process. So I hope that we achieve some of those goals tonight. As I said, my name is Emily Womack, a public art consultant and co-founder of Dyson and Womack. I'll let you guys, if you want, read the little bio here. But some of the things that I am most proud of having worked on is a public art collection for the California Air Resources Board that it was 5 artists really addressing climate change and climate equity and justice, and producing Current LA, the first 2 public art triennials in the city of Los Angeles. I'm also joined tonight again by my colleague, peer and friend, Ali M. Ali is a project manager at Dyson and Womack. She has so many more accolades than I can add to project manager, but is a truly passionate and caring person about supporting artists. And her work really resonates in that area, and I'm excited to be presenting with you tonight. So diving into our topic, what is an open call? It's a phrase that we use really a lot in the field of public art, but it doesn't exist in as much in as strong of a way outside of that, in say more studio or gallery practices. An open call is really a term for a competitive process. It is typically 1 or 2 stages, and it is where a commissioning agency has received funds or has saved funds or has in some way allocated funds for an art opportunity. That might be a mural, a sculpture, an intervention in some way, a temporary piece. It's not always a permanent piece. And they decide that they want to commission artists for this art opportunity. Many times, commissioning agencies, because they are government agencies in many cases, are required to do this work through an open competitive process. Other times they choose to do so because there's a desire to be equitable, to put support out, to see what artists might be interested, to cast a wide net. We can talk about whether open calls are always the most equitable approach to selecting artists, but they are the approach that is primarily used in this field. And artists are asked, this 2-stage process is typically called 2 things: a request for qualifications, which we colloquially call RFQ, or a request for proposals, also RFP. So if you see those terms, they also are shorthand for open call. That means someone is wanting artists to respond. There are RFQs and RFPs in many different fields. They're not all limited to art, but in an art context, it's an open call for artists. An RFQ is exactly what it says. It is looking for qualifications of the artists. They will usually ask for CVs, for examples of past work, for letters of interest. A shortlisting process is then utilized to go from the larger group of artists that might apply to an RFQ to bring that down to a smaller group of artists that are invited to then participate in the RFP stage. RFP is where artists are typically given a stipend, some type of financial support to develop a proposal, i.e. respond to the art opportunity, to say, here is the wall, here is the blank space, here is the canvas that we've offered for you. And the artists then are given some funds to start on paper, not in reality, but on paper, to develop a proposal idea and support to release that proposal back to the commission. And then there is a second round of review, and then an artist is typically selected. I'm going to speak a lot tonight about typically. Many agencies have their own little specific things that, sometimes are from laws and sometimes are just from ways of operating. So you may see a lot of variations on this as you work through looking for open calls, but I think the bones of this are really the structures of what's typically the case in public art open calls. Tonight, we're going to focus a lot more on the RFQ part. We're not going to focus as much on the RFP. Once you get to that stage, it's a little bit different. And perhaps in our next series, actually, we should maybe do one about the RFP stage. There's other words that we use in this field, one of which is limited competition and another is a direct commission. These, not everything is always an open call, although that's typical, but you might see things called a limited competition. That might be where a commissioning agency has engaged an art consultant, such as Dyson Womack or others. And when they do that, they might have less requirements to be fully an open call, and they might invite the consultant, the curator, to actually curate a smaller group of artists that are invited to then participate in a limited competition to go basically directly into an RFP point, skipping the RFQ. There's also direct commissions that happen sometimes too, where there may be no competitive process at all, and where an agency, a commissioning agency might just directly commission an artist to do a public artwork. That does happen. Typically not in the governmental sector, again, for the reasons that I said on the previous slide, but these are other ways that public art does come into being.
So thank you, Emily. How do we find these open call opportunities? These are just a few examples of ways to find open calls. There's many ways you can, but we have just collated a few of the ones that we have found successful. The first being listings and postings. And you'll see here, we've named 4 online platforms that usually post a lot of Southern California-based opportunities. We have Americans for the Arts, PAC-SoCal, the California Arts Council, CAC, and CodaWorks. I've also found that for listings and postings, keywords is essential when you're searching because there can be like hundreds of opportunities they post. So if you have a theme that you're looking for or a medium, I would suggest searching for those. The next is signing up for commissioning agencies' email lists. So that's like, for example, you're signing up and subscribing for the arts and cultures newsletters. And in those newsletters, which I've been receiving lately, it's very helpful. They directly email you, it's in your inbox, and they have a list of opportunities that artists can apply to. And there's commissioning agencies all across LA County, so I highly suggest this one. And today with social media, you can search for tags, such as on Twitter or Instagram. If you look up these 3 hashtags, you'll see multiple open calls for artists. They're local or national or international. And another one that I've been doing is setting up Google Alerts. This is through Google, but it's using keywords to find opportunities, and they send it directly to your inbox.
Thanks, Sally. I really also think that these ways of finding these opportunities are really critical, because a lot of the things that we hear from artists is that they find out about an opportunity like 2 days before the deadline.
Yeah.
And that's just not enough time to put an application together. So if you're proactive, like Ali was just saying, with having Google alerts and things, when the agencies put out the calls, you'll immediately get that notification. And so usually an open call might be open for, anywhere from 4 to 8 to even 12 weeks. And so if you have these places that you're checking or that you're getting automatically routed to your email, there's more of a chance that you will come across the opportunities that you want to apply to right when they come out, giving you ample time to apply.
Mm-hmm.
I really think this is a very important slide. Because Allie said something when she was talking about it on the last slide, which is that there are lots of opportunities, and there are a lot of opportunities across America and in California and in Southern California from different agencies. And it is time consuming to apply. It does take time. It takes some effort, and as we'll talk about further down, it's typically a good idea not to just copy and paste. So if you're putting in that effort to really tailor an application to a specific call, that is even more time that you would need. So it's actually super important to think about, is this opportunity one I want to put my time towards? Is this opportunity something that is a good fit, that I feel good about? And so we wanted to share some tips about how to analyze an open call and decide if that is something that's right for you. Um, the first one sounds really straightforward. Sorry, my cat's making a really crazy noise right now. Apologize. Um, so it sounds pretty straightforward, but I just there's no substitute to really carefully reading the open call, because you learn a lot about an opportunity from the open call that gets put out. You learn a lot about the agency. There's typically a section about the agency, about the values that they have, about what they're trying to achieve. You also learn a lot about what they're looking for. They're typically very clear about who would be maybe a good fit for this opportunity in terms of career status or in terms of experience. And again, I want to do a side note real quick that a lot of what we're talking about tonight is about how the current public art landscape exists. There may be things that we would like to change about it that we think should be different. And there's a lot of work happening in PAiD through the PAiD program to actually achieve that really important change that will open opportunities more for folks, that will think about radically, the way that we do these processes. And I encourage you guys to follow along with the work that the PAiD program and the county are doing, because I think they really are engaging through this program in some formative and structural review and change. But what we are talking about tonight is the current practices. And so a lot of current open calls are really clear about, like, this is only for somebody who's realized 2 or 3 public artworks at $300,000 a piece. If they are saying that, they mean that. And so those are really clear and important things to look for, to see if this is an opportunity that's suitable for you at your current career status or your current goals. Consider the application requirements and the time for completing the application. Do you have that time? Usually there's also really specific cutoffs. If you are late, it's not going to be considered. So if it feels like this is a huge lift, take solace in the fact, again, about what Ali said, that there is lots of opportunities. This isn't going to be the last one that crosses your desk that you want to apply for. So if it feels like too much of a stretch, maybe it's not the right one for the right moment. That kind of goes to the next point too, of reviewing your capacities to take on a commission, not just the application, but the actual commission. Timelines for completing in public art are years sometimes. These tend, specifically, particularly for permanent pieces, these tend to not be a few months long projects. They tend to be a year to multiple year projects. So it's really important to consider as well at that moment, do you have the capacities to be able to take on a commission with that commitment to that time? A lot of applications will also host pre-application info sessions, a Zoom like this, or some other form. They may, at the very minimum, accept questions, and then they'll put the questions and answers back out. It's a great opportunity to avail yourself of that. Speaking clearly as someone who has run open calls, we have never received questions or engagement from artists that has been anything but seen as a positive, in terms of, ask those questions, utilize that moment. The agencies want you to ask those questions because they want to make sure that your responses are best suited. They really want to find an artist that understands the project, that wants to be engaged in that project. So it's not something that I think you should be hesitant about using. I think it's there for a reason, and folks want to hear from you. They are very they need you to apply, and they really want to hear what questions and concerns, so that your applications can be as clear and direct to what's needed as possible. And then this last one is really just again about that capacity and that consideration. I know, having been someone who's applied to these calls in the past, it can feel like the pressure is a lot to apply to them. And I promise you, there are lots of opportunities. If it's feeling like too much, if it's feeling like not the right fit, sometimes it's a good opportunity to take consideration about that. And if you do choose to apply, to do so with that feeling of confidence that that is something that you've reviewed, you feel good about, and you want to apply to. I'm just going to quickly go through this slide and then hand it back over to Allie. But I did want to share what the actual process typically is, because it's a very process-oriented space that we are existing in. There's a commissioning agency that has funds and an opportunity. They write that into an RFQ that we talked about. That is usually a document that is released out, housed on a website, sent out as a PDF, sent out through an email. Artists then apply and respond. Typically, there are responses are either accepted in email, or even more traditionally now through online platforms. You may have come across a few. There's Submittable, there's Cafe, there's a lot of different ones that agencies use. Sometimes you have to set up an account with those. It's good to factor that time into your application too, because that's sometimes websites fail, sometimes things are glitchy. So it's important to give yourself time for uploading documents. You respond to the RFQ, submit those applications. Then a small committee that has been put together by the commission is convened to review the RFQs and select a smaller group of artists from that initial applicant pool to go into the RFP stage. That group typically is formed out of stakeholders from whatever project might be running, whether there's an architect or somebody involved. If it's a building, if it's a park, maybe someone from the park. There's more and more frequently someone from the community that might be immediately surrounding or a part of where the project's going. You'll likely have an artist on the panel, excuse me, and you may have representatives from the commissioning agency themselves. These folks are invited to convene to review these applications. After once artists are selected, the RFP artists are offered a stipend to respond to the RFP. Again, I think we might do another session more about RFPs in the future. And then they submit their proposals, and that same selection committee, it's usually the same one as from the first part, will convene again to review those proposals and typically make a suggestion to the commissioning agency and say, this is the one we think you should go with, or we think this one, or we have reservation about this, we'd like more clarity. And then the commissioning agency will review that recommendation and determine if they want to proceed or not.
So what we have here is the RFQ requirements. And going back to the typical, this is what you will typically see in a request for qualifications. These might not be all of the requirements, but normal RFQs are just baseline. They are going to request these items. And the first one we have is your letter of interest or the statement of interest. And this letter it's a brief letter that articulates why the artist is interested in the commission. It's going to highlight their experience and why their experience is relevant to the project. It's going to explain why the artist would be well suited to the commission opportunity. And it's going to provide information on the types of artwork the artist makes and how their artwork thematically or aesthetically will enhance the commission opportunity. And then we have the CV. So this CV, an artist CV, is different from a regular curriculum vitae. We call it a detailed record of their artistic accomplishments and professional experience. And when we say professional experience, we are talking about everything related to art, not, your career history. And it's a tool that artists can use to introduce themselves, basically. It's a way to say who they are and what their experience is to galleries, curators, and commissioners. And it's often tailored to reflect a specific expertise. And we're going to go into more into the CV and present examples of what the difference is between an artist and a regular CV. And the next we have portfolio. So the artist portfolio is where you're going to showcase your specific style and method of creation in the best light possible. And again, we have a workshop tomorrow that is focused on preparing a public art portfolio specifically for applications. So if you're interested in this, I highly recommend you attend tomorrow's workshop. But a portfolio is going to include documentation of completed artworks, but also photos or images of installations, sketches. It'll have audio files and video recordings, depending on what the open call is requiring. And usually the open call is going to clearly state what format. So if it's a JPEG or if it's a TIFF, PDF, or MP4 file, how many images you need and other requirements that are necessary for the portfolio submission. And then references are not always asked, but when they are requested, references are sought to provide further insight into the artist's capacities and track record. And I have often seen that when open calls ask for references, they come from previously completed projects, and it can be accompanied by a request for the exact project details and the role and relationship between the artist and the reference on the project. And then again, we're going to go into more detail about who these references could be later on. And special requirements. As we mentioned, there are special requirements for certain RFQs, and these may be due to legal requirements or it's because they want to hone in on a certain aspect of the project or gather some type of specific information about the artist. But what is true across all of these application processes is that attention to detail matters. It is so important to accurately provide what is being requested of the RFQ to remain in consideration. So we always tell artists to give yourself enough time to read through the application requirements, check and double check your submission before submitting your final application.
I also wanted to put a note in about applying as an individual or applying as a team. This has come up more and more where artists or commissioners have offered an option to apply either as an individual or as a team. And I think it's important to clarify what we mean by that, because public art is a team-based endeavor. If you have a commission, you are going to have a team. You're going to have probably a project manager. You're going to probably have an engineer involved at some point if it's a permanent piece that isn't a mural. If you're doing sculptural pieces, you might have even a landscape architect or an architect involved at some point. You might have a fabricator involved. There's going to be a lot of people supporting this project, depending on, the size and the scale. That isn't what we mean by a team at this point and stage. What we mean by a team at this stage is actually a collaboration between two or more artists. And some artists choose to do that in the public art field specifically because of what I was saying earlier about the large scale nature and the length of projects. And sometimes it's really great to work on something collaboratively with another artist for that duration of time. It gives folks a chance to maybe take a vacation if they've got someone else that can support while they're there. Or maybe it's just, the opportunity is a little bit larger, and so you choose to maybe collaborate together to be able to navigate a larger project than one may have done on their own. If you choose to apply as an artist team, though, it's very important to show the commission how that work might blend together. If you have two really distinct portfolios, it's quite difficult when reviewing for the commissioners to understand how the two different aesthetics or how the two different artistic approaches could marry. And part of what folks are looking at the RFQ stage in those portfolios is how might this artist approach the opportunity we have out? They've not submitted a proposal. We don't know exactly what they're going to say, but we're looking for clues about how their previous practice might inform what they might propose in this opportunity. So if you have really different practices or you've never worked together, it can be an added hurdle to your application where it becomes harder for that commissioning agency and that reviewing committee to be able to see what might come out of that collaboration. So I think if collaborating, really consider how either through your portfolio or through your letter of interest, you can clearly articulate how your work would blend together if you haven't done projects together before. If you have, definitely be sure to show that and to talk about, how your work complements in your individual practice and in your collaborative practice. I think I should have gone to this slide as I was speaking too. So again, I think this speaks to what I was just saying about how, public art at the next stage, at the RFP stage, does sometimes ask artists to articulate who that team might include. As I said, it might be an engineer. Your project might have a lighting element. You might bring a lighting designer on board. You might have a project manager on board. That part of building that team might come into play at the RFP stage, but it certainly won't be asked for at the RFQ stage, at stage 1, when you're applying with your qualifications.
So we're gonna go into more detail about each kind of component of an application. And we've put together some do's and don'ts for the letter of interest or the statement of interest. So we have the first one, do share why this particular opportunity is of interest, highlighting any relevant connections. Just like any statement, what you want to do is share why your work is relevant to the opportunity, why you want to apply, and what is relevant between your practice, your artwork, and this project. The next we have do display knowledge of the commission opportunity. Like I said, they want to know that you understand what their vision and their mission is. And usually in an RFQ, they'll write it out, like the project objectives or project mission. And it's really good to kind of include that in the letter. Do highlight how your work might translate into materials or mediums relevant to the opportunity. So this is kind of like if your works are on paper and that is what you have in your portfolio, this is the time to say in your statement or your letter how this could relate into a sculpture. And I think it's a really good opportunity for folks who do not have a lot of public art experience, but that want to get into it, that this is a way for you to share how you can make this happen. And then we have do be clear about what your practice is and how it relates to the opportunity. I think that this can be done in the letter of interest, and I also think that this can be done in curating your public art portfolio. And we have do briefly highlight past projects that showcase your unique skill. So sometimes RFQs will ask for there are times where they ask for completed projects or completed artworks. And I think that this would be a great time to highlight what completed projects you have done so that you are showing them that you can successfully complete a public art commission. And give yourself enough time to revise and review the letter. Statements and letters, writing in general is really hard for me, and I feel like it's really hard for some folks too. So I always say, give yourself enough time, read it over, and maybe even have a peer read it over and help you with it. Follow directions very carefully. As we mentioned, it's really key to follow their directions and make sure that you are submitting what they asked for, because the smallest little mistake could get you disqualified, unfortunately. And for RFQs, you are not pitching a proposal. So you're not writing what you're going to make. You are writing why you are qualified, why your experience is making you qualified to be in this part of this project. And another one, which seems really simple, but don't go over the required page or word count. This is another one of those, follow the directions. If it's 2 pages, keep it 2. If it's 500 words, keep it at 500 words.
Thanks, Allie.
Mhm.
So we're gonna dive into, those requirements that Allie walked through a little bit ago about the letter of interest, the CV. We're gonna go through each of those in a little bit more detail now. So this is something that we've adapted a little bit from a Creative Capital link and resource, and we've put the link there at the bottom too. And Allie, if you don't mind, if we could
Yeah.
put that in chat, because I think it's also a really great resource for folks who are interested in this topic and are wanting to hone up on applying. So this is adapted again, like I said, from this Creative Capital how to, but I think it's really strong and I think it's really resonant. Obviously, I think folks can do their own tweaks and make it their own in certain ways. But as we have shared throughout this evening, the application process for public art is not necessarily the place to bring all of your creative skills to bear. It's more the place to follow the rules and standards with some creative license. So one way to structure a letter of interest might be for the first paragraph to look at, why are you interested in this project? What about the RFQ, when you read that document, stood out to you? Was it the location? Is there something about where the art opportunity is that really resonated with you? Do you have a relationship with that location? Do you have a history or a past having lived or near that location? Was it a topic or a theme that resonated with your work that made you want to be applying to this? Or was it maybe that it was an inspiring kind of concept or space or opportunity of how you might put your work in a new context? So sharing why you are interested in this project specifically is a really great way to start this letter of interest. You can show that you maybe took some time to do some research about the opportunity or the commissioning agency. Again, maybe a sentence, nothing massive, but just showing that, you're not just boilerplate replying to all, but you're actually taking a second to consider the specifics of this open call. And then maybe briefly summarizing why you think you might be a good fit for that commission. In the second paragraph, that's really where you can speak more about you as an artist, really elaborate on perhaps your vision broadly for the project, but and also how the projects you've done in the past might relate to this. You should certainly mention relevant experience you might have in public art or other community projects in this paragraph. But be careful to kind of keep this conceptually. We've highlighted twice now about how, or maybe probably more than that the RFQ part is not the place for a proposal. And I've underscored that on this one too, because unfortunately, I have seen a lot of artists who probably would have gotten commissions or would be amazing fits for a commission, lose out on that opportunity because they put forward a proposal at this stage. There's so many reasons why that's not a great idea. There's usually, a lot of different voices in the room at that stage. Maybe the opportunity itself hasn't really been delved into. You usually get more information at the RFQ P stage, more time, more resources to develop it. And putting forward an idea at this point, it usually only ends up having people go, that's not really what we wanted. We're not thinking about that right now. You want to avoid that. You don't want folks thinking about, do I want this specific piece in this at this stage? You want them thinking about, oh, wow, I really love this artist's work. What might they think of if we gave them an opportunity to think about it in this point? Um, One of the things we're highlighting across all of this workshop is how, you know, these are really competitive applications. There's a lot of folks that are going to apply, and there's going to be a pretty there's usually more applications. There's always more applications than folks that can get the opportunity. So we're wanting to highlight some of the stronger pitfalls that we have seen that have prevented folks from getting through to the next stage. And then in a third or final paragraph, is maybe an opportunity to really try to just sell your work, sell yourself, convince that committee that this is a great project for you, sum up what your qualifications are and why you would be a great candidate for this commission. It's also never a bad idea to say thank you in that last paragraph too, because on the other side of this, I can say when you have a commission where you're reviewing 200-300 applications, it's a lot of work and there's a lot of effort put into that. And so sometimes it's nice to kind of acknowledge the time that people take with reviewing your application.
So what you're seeing here right now is it's two different types of CV. In the middle or on the right-hand side, you'll see a regular career experience CV, and on the left is where you have an artist CV. And we have circled in green kind of what the differences is. And an artist CV is different from a professional work resume because it does not necessarily include any non-related art-related school or employment histories. And when you're applying to public or civic art projects, this is super helpful to help to call out specific attention to public art related experience. And so what you'll see on the left here is instead of a professional experience, you're going to have your selected exhibitions, awards and honors, publications and media. And you can even insert some skills and techniques. And if you have art related teaching experience, you can put that in the professional experience. But usually I've also seen in other applications where they specifically have a section for public art commissions. If you do have experience in that, I would highlight it as its own unique section so that people know that you have completed these projects in the past. Yeah. And then for the portfolio, so we like to call it the backbone of the RFQ application. And again, we're going to cover this in a very broad way. We're going tomorrow with the curator Oscar Hisa, and it's tomorrow at 6 p.m. and we hope you're going to join. But we're going to go over a few top level do's and don'ts that are good reminders for when you're creating a portfolio in response to an RFQ. And so number one is follow the directions. So what are the required file types? How many images do they want? What are the sizes of the images? And I would say that when you're doing this, sometimes they ask for images in a PDF or they ask for 10 images separately. And sometimes they ask for descriptions or file names. It's really key to take note of these and to read thoroughly through the directions. And in your portfolio, if this is for an RFQ, do not submit proposals. Don't submit sketches of them or renderings of them. You want to showcase your practice, your artwork, and how it relates to the project. Be considerate of the committee's review time and limit lengthy videos or audio files. So as someone who has been on the other side, this is very true. I want we are very respectful, and most committees are very respectful of how much time it took to submit these portfolios. But and usually in an RFQ, they'll say, limit your audio files to 3 minutes, or if you have a video, can we have a reel? But I would say, be mindful of that. Don't submit a 14-minute audio file and expect them to listen to all of it, because what if they receive 600 applicants? And then carefully curate the portfolio to best relate to the art opportunity and scale. I want to emphasize scale because if they're looking for a permanent public art installation and they are specifically calling out for a large scale sculptural installation, then you want to make sure that your portfolio best represents that you are capable of doing this. And give yourself time for the portfolio descriptions if requested. This has come up a lot and I've seen it too, but sometimes they will ask for specific descriptions of each project or each image that you submit in the portfolio, whether it's in the file name or whether it's in a different text field that you have to enter. Make sure that that best represents your work. This is another opportunity for you to kind of appeal yourself. And as always, ask someone to look at your portfolio and give you some feedback. I think that, having a peer look at your work is always a little scary sometimes, but it's very helpful. And I think honest feedback is something that everyone should kind of be a part of.
I totally agree. And I really, that second point or that next to last point about the descriptions is
Yeah.
so key, because one, about giving yourself the time, because sometimes you're so focused on selecting the images or the video files and forget that, oh my gosh, you've got to write, 100 words about each of these. And that can be the thing that makes somebody late on submitting a portfolio or or an application. But also, as Ali said, it's another opportunity outside of the word capped letter of interest to slip in some things that might just be the thing that puts you over in terms of the selection. So if you give yourself time to really craft those descriptions and think about, what you're putting in them, it can be a great way to do that.
And then we have references. So as I mentioned, they're not always asked, but when they are asked, references for a public art commission might include former teachers or former professors, whether it's bachelor's or master's or wherever. It can be artistic peers but they should have direct knowledge of your practice. Um, so it can be, I feel like sometimes it could be your studio mate or someone who is within the art, like professionally, the art world, and knows about your practice. There's also professional peers, gallerists or commissioners or stakeholders from prior projects. And something about, for prior projects, in some cases, the commissioning agency may require references be from past projects. And I think that when they ask this is really key. In these cases, this opportunity where they ask for references from past projects, it might not be the best fit for artists with little or no public art experience, because they are specifically saying they want someone, they want to work with an artist who has completed a public art project. And so this is kind of the be careful with reading through all of the requirements and be considerate of your time, because applications do take a very long time.
Yeah, I totally agree, Allie. And I think, like, if you put that effort in and then you get to the end and you're like, oh, I'll just put the references in and then see that it's something where it's asking for those types of references, it might mean that you actually just can't submit and you've put all that work in. So it's a good thing to look for. I remember from the first time we presented this session that someone had a question that made me realize I wanted to be really clear about something about references. Typically, these are not references like if you're applying to, school where someone writes a letter for.
Mm.
What we're talking about when we say references here is more like a job reference where you give a name, a phone number, and an email address. And then that agency, usually if you go to the second stage of the RFP stage, typically not at the RFQ. They might not reach out to all of them, but if you make it to the second stage of the RFP, they might. They would either email or call that reference to ask, would you recommend this person? So I just wanted to clarify by what we meant by references is typically just you submitting, as Ellie said, the who that person is. They might ask what the relationship is, like whether they someone you've worked with before in whatever capacity, but they're not asking you to actually get a written letter from that person in most cases. So we also wanted to spend a little time tonight speaking directly to folks who might be thinking about applying to public art for the first time. One of the most consistent comments about this field is how hard it is to get into it for the first time, because of the things that we have just been talking about tonight, because of requirements to show references in some cases from completed public art projects, because of the requirements to show projects, public art projects that have been completed in the past. Um, However, through work like this program and others, and through a lot of dedication and thinking about it, that is somewhat changing, and there are opportunities that are really good fits for first-time applicants. And as someone who has commissioned artists directly, I can say we have absolutely commissioned first-time applicants for projects of larger budgets, hundreds plus, where we weren't specifically, saying this was only open to first times. So while there are added hurdles, it is certainly not impossible. And if this is a field that you are particularly interested in, drawn towards, I think there are ways to um, get that first step into this field. So in the next two slides, I'm just going to talk a little bit about, some of the ways that first-time applicants might be able to elevate their proposals and stand out and get over that biggest of hurdles of securing a first commission. I also just want to say that it is really, a lot of that is also self-selecting out. I mentioned at the top of this that, maybe public art open calls is not necessarily the most equitable approach to commissioning. And the reason I said that is because so many artists look at opportunities and say, nope, I'm never going to get this. I'm self-selecting out. I'm not doing this. I'm not applying. When agencies are actually genuinely interested in hearing from artists at different stages of their careers. This also goes back to that reading the RFQ closely. I know when we write RFQs, we are very specific and clear in our language, and we mean what we say in it. And I know many commissioning agencies are the same. So if we are saying this is open to first-time applicants, we really do mean that. And I think it's also really important to remember that even folks who have gotten commissions apply to hundreds and maybe get one out of that, not getting it. There are so many things that are not up to you. There are the selection commissions, there are the selection bodies that we talked about that are comprised of multiple individuals. There are different biases, there are different interests, there are different agendas. There are so many things that are not going to be up to you. And so it's helpful, I think, to kind of think about what is up to you, which is your choice to apply, your choice to want to engage, and your choice of how you craft your application. And I also think it's really great to think about what feels comfortable and right for you at that stage. I really encourage you, if you're thinking about joining this field, to read as many open calls as you can before you decide to apply to one. They come in so many different forms, they read differently, and I think if you can take a second to read through different ones, it might help you to find one that you actually feel more comfortable applying to, or things that you don't feel comfortable applying to. And as Allie and I have said multiple times tonight, saying one more time, please give yourself ample time to complete the applications. It is going to take twice the time you think it will. And if it's your first time, it might even take 3 times the time you think it will. And I'm very aware that time is a commodity that not everyone has. And so again, I want to say like, uh, it can be really frustrating and really hard to feel like you've applied and you're not getting things, and you've applied and you're not getting things. And so I just want to recommend maybe really taking time to think about which one or two you might want to apply, and spending that time really focusing on the application for that once, instead of trying to apply to 5 or 6 all at once. And even if you don't get that one that you spent that time on, having done that is going to set you up so much better for the next one you do apply to. I also think it's a great way for initial artists. Many of the artists I have seen secure their first commission is because of how clearly they have spoken about their personal, social, or thematic resonance with a project. Um, Today, more than ever, we're really focused on how the artist, the site, the context all relate and speak to one another. And so it's super important. And it can be the thing that really, again, like I said, pushes you over into getting into that next stage of proposal. If you can be really, if you can really share how this open call does have a really strong relationship to either, again, a personal or a social or a thematic resonance. It can help that group understand why you've chosen this application to apply to, um, out of the many that there are. There are different ranges. So public art commissions can range from a couple $1,000s, all the way up to hundreds and hundreds or millions of dollars. So I think this was again, to the point before, thinking about what you're ready and comfortable with at this point. There's also a lot of applications now for non-traditional media. There's applications for digital media, for sound media, as is the case in art writ large. The non-traditional medias tend to receive smaller budgets. And so that can be a really great way to look at, securing a first commission, or, temporary projects as well are a great way to secure a first commission and show that you can kind of take that next step. I also think it's really, having read a lot of letters of interest and look at a lot of things, it means a lot to me personally when I read letters that someone has taken a moment to share that they understand the uniqueness of public art different from maybe a studio or gallery practice. I think that that can be something that I'm like, okay, maybe they haven't done this before in the past, but they do have a sense of what it takes to do this, and they understand that. That can be a really big difference in terms of kind of, um, again, taking it over that finish line. Being here tonight is doing that work. And so I think even just saying, like, I've gone to workshop, I've read up, I understand that, briefly, you don't have to belabor the point, but that can be a really helpful key element to drop in. How you see your work changing. So if you have a really studio-based practice that maybe hasn't done work in materials that might be suitable for a more permanent project. And I also want to say we're going to have a workshop. We're still selecting the date just now, but we are going to have a workshop about materials, specifically about materials that are good for permanent public artworks. And I think we might do more of that in the next iteration of these workshops too. So that's an opportunity to learn about that. But it would be really great, I think, to kind of highlight like, hey, I've worked in this material or this medium, but I also could see how my work might translate to this or that material or medium, and how your current practice relates thematically and aesthetically to the commission opportunity. So with that, we have gone through all of the slides we have for you guys tonight, and are going to open this out to any questions we might have received. In the last two workshops, the setting on our Zoom for me has changed just a little bit, so I actually can't see the Q&As when I'm screen sharing. and I want to be able to read what you've asked and look at them. So I am going to stop the screen share for this part of the conversation so that we can actually, I can actually see that window. And we'll answer any questions that you may have in the next few minutes. And if we don't have questions, then we'll end early tonight. And so, okay, thank you. I've got this open. And Allie, can we invite Pat to join us again?
Yes.
Great.
And for folks who are joining for the first time, the Q&A button is usually located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It has a little question mark and it says Q&A, and you can enter your questions there. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I actually promoted the wrong person.
Oh, that's okay. We're just having a lot of little tweaks and things tonight. So thanks, guys. Hey, Pat.
Hello.
Pat, I thought just before we dive into the questions, if you just want to introduce yourself, and if there's anything you wanted to add, then we can go straight into the questions, or if not, but just to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to everyone tonight.
Sure, no problem. My name's Pat Gomez. I'm a senior project manager for the Civic Art Division for the Department of Arts and Culture. And we are so happy that you have joined us tonight. And I also wanted to let you know, it was mentioned at the beginning of this program that we are having a program for an art apprenticeship. And that is, I want to just mention that a little bit more deeply because that call will be released next week. So if you are on our department's email list, you'll get an email that will give you a link to that call. And what that call is, there's going to be 2 cohorts of 5 artists that will be selected to be apprentices. And those artists will be provided with a civic art project with a budget between $100,000 and $200,000. They will be provided with a location for that art to exist, and they will be provided with specific personalized training and mentorship to help them through every single stage of designing and managing a public art project. So at the end, you will have a permanent public art project that you will have completed, and training that will certainly help you as you move forward in your career. So it's an amazing opportunity, and it'll probably take about a year to 18 months time to get through it. But it is so worth it if you are looking to get into this field and you have no experience. I would encourage everyone. It will be open to people who are have their primary residence in Los Angeles County. So that's who will have that eligibility. So thank you.
Thank you, Pat. And I'm so excited to realize that's going out next week. That's
Yeah. So
awesome.
me.
Cool. All right. Well, let's dive into our questions. Allie, do you mind fielding some for us?
Yes. So the first question we received is, would this workshop series be something to add on the CV until artists get a few more commissions?
Yeah, I see why not. Don't see why not. If you have a section that's on trainings, certainly.
Mhm.
I totally agree.
We got a couple questions about the CV. And so one is asking, what is a good page limit for a resume? And someone said that, they really appreciated the difference between an art resume and a professional experience resume, and it would be more helpful to share more about this.
Pat?
Okay, sure. So when this goes back to your reading the call very carefully, because I know that we do, and I'm sure that others do as well. We will list the maximum number of pages for the CV. So you're going to want to pay attention to that. Um, I would also in terms of the difference between that and a sort of a regular job resume is that think about the CV as you sharing your accomplishments as an artist. So although I'm sure you may have wonderful accomplishments as an accountant or something else, that's really not what we're hiring. We're hiring an artist. So you'd want to go ahead and list any exhibitions you've been in. If you have a lot, then do a selection of them. You could separate if you've had a solo show from a group show, those sorts of things. And then, of course, maybe some other kinds of, if you're involved in an art collective of some sort, you might want to list that. So it's really conveying your experience in the art world as an arts professional.
Yep, I agree. And, if you're thinking about it, I would say typically I have seen the resumes stick to around 2 to 4 pages or the CVs. Most of the open calls I see when they limit the page limit, it's usually either 2 or 4 or something like that. And I know that can be really hard for some artists who have really extensive career experience. And I think that also goes to the topic of tailoring the resume to the opportunity. So if you have tons and tons and tons of gallery experience and you've done a few public art commissions, you're going to want to put those public art commissions more to the top in this resume. And as Pat said, maybe select some of the gallery experience to shorten and abbreviate. Or if you have lots of publications and your work's been, featured in lots of different magazines or things like that, that might be an area that you could shrink for this in terms of highlighting maybe some of the projects that you feel like you might want to that might be more related to the application.
And then on the opposite end of that, if you're somebody who doesn't have really a lot of experience, you might want to list, for example, if uh, you're teach community art at your local art center, or if you are involved in, a lot of maybe craft fairs situations,
Mm.
or other kinds of things that you're doing. Maybe you have an Instagram account with a lot of followers. So you might want to mention that. So it's, there's a range of things that you could put in there.
Yeah, totally.
Um, okay. Is it ever acceptable to apply as an art team with a fabricator?
Well, on the RFQ level, at least for us, for the county, we would not recommend it, because in a way that's sort of assuming the kind of work you're going to do, and you haven't come up with a proposal yet. So how would you know who your fabricator is if you don't know yet what the project is? So it's a little, we're really looking and you're going to be reviewed on the basis of the artwork as the artist.
I agree. I think at the RFP stage, sometimes they do want to see team members like that. And I have seen calls where they do say that, but as we have been saying through all of this, read it really clearly. And if they say artist or artist team at the RFQ, they probably mean artists collaborating. They probably do not mean fabricators or other collaborators at that point. But again, that's very different from the RFP stage.
For the purpose of an RFQ issued by a municipality, would a commission by a private entity installed at a location accessible to the public be considered public art experience?
Yeah. For us, and anyway, I would think for most people that would be something you'd want to list, because it's showing that you have had to manage a project that involved fabrication, involved a budget, involved use of materials, and so forth. So you would list it as a private commission, but you would want to share that artwork so that the municipality can see that you have completed a project and that, you know, of a certain scope.
I agree. And I also think that it's, you know, I have seen folks include public-private partnership things in public art. I have seen people, there's many cases where like a business or somebody might commission a mural for the site, that then they might select you directly. That is still in my mind, public art. And I think you could absolutely put that on there, whether it's been commissioned by a municipality or not. There are many people that commission artists to make quote unquote public art. It's not just governments, and that is all valid and relevant experience.
I just thought of something for the resume. In the artist resume, when you are listing your past completed projects, it's always good to include the commissioning agency, the title of your artwork, and the location. I realize that is something to include because you want to share with them where you have, done these projects with who.
Absolutely.
And then I think this might be our last question, but does PAiD have internship opportunities?
I wish. We don't. Although if you are in general interested in internship opportunities, actually the county if you're still in college, so this, but if you're still in college, the county has a very extensive internship program that it runs. And literally there are hundreds of students that will be funded for jobs, basically primarily summer jobs. And those interns will be hired by all nonprofits all throughout the county, all kinds of nonprofits for all sorts of things. So the call just went out for the organizations to get an intern. So a little further down the road, then all those organizations are going to start recruiting for their interns, which once they get funded for the internship. So it's a very robust program. And if you are a college student, again, this is, every kind of nonprofit, museum, institution you could possibly think, nonprofit arts organizations have interns that are funded by the county.
I also think that the apprenticeship is in many ways similar in terms of if you're looking at internships, you might really be interested in looking at the paid apprenticeship. So as Pat shared at the top of this, that call goes out next week.
They actually just followed up and asked where are the details about the county's program listed?
It's on our website. So you know what, hold on while we're talking, let me just see if I can find it real quick and provide a link. Give me a moment. But go on while I look.
We have a participant tonight who is a professional resume writer, which is an awesome skill. And actually added a little comment for one of the questions about where you might put this workshop series. And if you do have a heading in your resume about education or professional development, putting the PAiD program workshop series under that would be a really great idea.
Can I put this in the chat?
Yeah.
So
I would just make sure that it goes to everyone.
Hosts,
and
it just says hosts and panelists.
If you
just give it to us and we'll copy it and share it to everybody.
Okay. So what I just shared is a link to the page on the website, which is about the internship. And it is a grant program for the organizations. And then once the organizations get funded, they then will hire interns. So, yeah.
I think we have a couple more questions that have come in, so we have time.
So portfolios often asked to include budget.
Hmm.
What do you put if it was just for the kudos? Should I try to find their budget and put that in?
So, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead.
Okay.
I think part of it is to understand what it costs to make. So it may not be commissioned piece. It could be just a piece that you've created, but the budget would be, the cost of your time and materials, as well as all the fabrication and so forth. So it's understood sort of the scale of the project.
I agree. And if it's something where there are some opportunities where you might just do a design and then the other piece, maybe the commissioning agency has the piece fabricated and installed. You could ask what those costs were and then include that as well. But I think it would be important to note that what your scope was. You could say, I created the design and the design fee was this, but the overall commission was this budget.
So this person has seen a number of RFPs without a stipend. And it's a tremendous amount of work to submit an RFP application. Would you caution, sorry, I just lost would you think that this is possibly a better way or a better chance for an artist looking for more public art experience to win a commission because there would be potentially less applicants? Or would you caution the artist in applying for these types of open calls because of the amount of time required without compensation? That's a tough one.
Yeah, I would say a couple things. First off, one of the reasons that we, for example, and most people don't want a proposal at the RFQ stage, which is the first stage, is because those artists, you're not getting paid to apply at that point. And you're even though it is work to apply to an RFQ, it's based on artwork that's already been created. You're not creating anything new for that stage. The county, we always pay for a proposal. It's like we feel very strongly artists should be paid for their work. So the groups and organizations that tend to not pay, in my observation, might be a municipality or a group that may not have as much experience working with artists. And so that may or may not work out, but it also may mean that you would need to probably go into that situation with a greater look at the contract and see what else they're asking from you and see what other kind of payment you're going to receive for what work. Just, it's an eyes open situation, but also be aware that the group may not have all the understanding of the specifics of working with an artist.
I could not agree more. I think it is a bellwether in some cases about, if there's a lack of an understanding at that point, there might be lacks of understanding in other spaces as well about the ways of working with artists. I also do not think that one should assume that it would mean less people would apply.
Mhm.
I think there's just so many more applicants than opportunities, although there are a lot of opportunities. I don't think that alone would mean, particularly at the RFQ stage, that there would be less applicants. So I would not want to say to folks on this call tonight that I think that would mean there'd be a greater chance of getting an initial opportunity. And I do think Pat was spot on that it's an eyes wide open point and that it would mean to look closely. there may be an instance where it's a really great fit and it makes a lot of, sense, and you really want to do it and you have the capacity to, but, the stipends, are typically not nothing, they can be several $1,000s, and sometimes that's not even enough to cover it. So I think it's also really important to think about, like, what if you got to that stage you would be committing to is basically, a couple $1,000s at least of expenses that might be real expenses, not just your time. You might need to pay for renderings. You might need to pay someone to validate a fabrication budget. So it might not just be that you're willing to go out on a limb and put your own time for free. You might actually have to put money into it.
Mhm. And could you speak to appropriate budget ranges of commissions to apply for based on experience? For instance, this person has been awarded a couple of commissions in the 100 to 140K range. What budget ranges would make sense to pursue?
I would say that if you're trying to step up, you might, I mean, there's kind of two things that I'm thinking about here. One is, um, there's generally the same steps, no matter what the budget is.
Mhm.
But the larger the budget would tend to be perhaps a little more complicated and involve engineering and things of that nature. So I think in terms of the budget size, it's as much of the kind of scope of work you've had to do to complete that piece. It may be a little bit of a stretch and although I don't never want to say discourage anyone from anything ever, but from 100,000 to, let's say, a 900,000, that may be looked at perhaps as something that, that would be a budget that would potentially involve a lot more people and management, and maybe you're not expressing all that. Maybe going into something below 500,000, like maybe 200, 300, something like that might seem like a reasonable thing. But again, there's no absolutes.
Mhm. I totally agree. And also, the budget size, I would say, is exactly what Pat said. It is oftentimes more of a reflection of the complexity of the project or the site. Like, maybe they already know that the site is gonna have to have, like, really intense foundations if or things like that, and so the commissioner has already thought about that, and they're putting in extra money on that front. So I think it's important, as we've said throughout, to look at, like, what is the actual commission, and if you can show, that you understand it, you understand what they've put forward, as much as one can from an RFQ, um, and highlight where, maybe you've worked with an engineer, you've worked with things. I really agree that I think it's there's not like a number that, might make sense, in that sense, but I think it's more about, like, why might that project have that budget and what might be required under it. I've seen some projects where it's like they know there's going to be a lot of nighttime engagement and they know they're going to have to do a lot with lighting, and that drives the budget up. And if you've never worked with a lighting designer, you've never done anything with lighting in your work, then that might be a stretch regardless of the budget. But if it's a big budget and everything that you've done really aligns with this project, I don't think the budget itself is necessarily the driver as much as many other factors combined.
I think that was all the questions.
Awesome. I will share my screen again because we do have a few final closing slides that I want to go through. So as I mentioned, and I know we put this in the chat as well, but we will be developing and producing and releasing a second set of workshops beyond the ones that are already publicly announced next year. So if you have been participating in this and there are topics that you want to make sure we consider addressing in the next iteration, if you have comments, if there are things that you would like us to consider, please feel free to email us and let us know. We are going to start developing the content for that second set iteration and not too long from now. So we want to hear if there are topics that you want to make sure that we're addressing. Again, we have a few more upcoming workshops. I think our last one is this Wednesday, October 2nd one of the online versions. There are going to be some in-person ones that we'll have more information about soon, but the online ones, we have 5 more. And so participate, come, finish. If you've been coming to them all, congratulations, finish this course with us. If you're new, come back, look at what topics might be of interest, and obviously when they are released in the recording version, you can go back and see ones we've already finished. That is the end of our workshop for tonight. Thank you for everyone who participated, who came, who asked questions. These were great questions tonight. Really kind of rounded out and fleshed out some of the topics that we were talking about. So I really appreciate it. And thank you to Pat, as always, for joining us and the question part and offering that really important county perspective. And thank you, Allie, for participating in the presentation tonight.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to end it here, folks.
Have a good night.